She had destroyed 11 assistants in 10 months. Some lasted hours. One lasted 40 minutes. The employment agencies had started refusing her calls, but on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning, a black single father with an empty bank account and a 7-year-old daughter counting on him walked through her front door, not because he believed he could survive her, but because he had absolutely no other choice. What happened next would cost them both everything they knew about pain, pride, and what it means to let another person in. Hit like, "Tell me what city you're watching from." Now, let's begin. The house stood on a quiet street in Greenwich, Connecticut. The kind of street where the trees were old enough to remember a different country. Ethan Brooks crossed the threshold at 8:15 on that rain-soaked Tuesday morning, his jacket dripping onto a marble floor that had probably cost more than the apartment he and his daughter lived in. A woman appeared at the end of the foyer, late 50s, Filipina, dressed in a gray uniform with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She introduced herself as Mrs. Polson, the housekeeper. Her eyes did something complicated when she saw him, a flicker of caution, then something softer that almost looked like relief. "This way, please, Mr. Brooks," she said. And as she led him down the hallway, she slowed just enough to lean toward him and whisper, "She's not always like this. You should know that before you go in." Ethan kept his voice level. "I don't know what she was like before. I only know what she's like now." Mrs. Polson studied him for half a second. Then she nodded once, the way someone nods at a person they have decided to root for in secret. The office was at the end of the hallway, and Victoria Sterling sat behind a glass desk in the center of it. Late 30s, white, blonde hair, pulled back without a single strand out of place. A cream-colored blouse, no jewelry. The wheelchair was a high-end model in carbon and leather, and she had positioned it so that the desk hid most of it from the door. She did not look up when he entered. She did not look up for 40 more seconds. When she finally did, her gaze made a small adjustment at the sight of him, a quarter second longer than necessary, and then her face went back to its usual flatness. "Sit down, Mr. Brooks," he sat. The chair across from her was lower than hers by an inch and a half. He noted it and let it pass. "I need the Hartman contract on my desk in 10 minutes, she said. "Use the document system. The credentials are on the card in front of you." He logged in. He searched Hartman. Nothing. He searched variations of the spelling. Nothing. He kept his face neutral and kept searching, because he had been in enough rooms in his life to know what the test looked like when it was being run on him. "At minute 8, he said evenly, "I've searched every variation. I can't find it under that name. If you can tell me where to look, I'll have it on your desk in under a minute." Her mouth tightened. She had wanted him to fail at this. He could see her recalibrating. "Check the Morrison subfolder," she said. The Hartman matter was filed under the referring client. He found it in 45 seconds. He printed it. He placed it on the corner of her desk without comment. By 11, she had found 4 things to correct. His font was 11 point instead of 12. His margin was a quarter inch off. The phone greeting he had used was not the format she used, which she had not told him. And then, between the 3rd and 4th correction, she said, almost lightly, "You articulate well, Mr. Brooks." The room went still in a way only Ethan noticed. He did not say anything. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds, long enough that she could read everything he was choosing not to say, the kind of look that did not announce itself, but landed. Then, he turned back to his screen and reformatted the document. She did not say that sentence to him again. By 6 in the evening, the desk Mrs. Polson had cleared for him had tomorrow's files squared to the corner. The second week settled into a rhythm that was less hostile than the first, but no less watchful. Ethan arrived at 7:15 each morning, prepped Victoria's calendar by 7:30, and started the day with a quiet efficiency that gave her nothing to complain about, and, more importantly, nothing to display. The work itself was not the problem. He had managed a property maintenance crew for 3 years in Newark, before everything changed, and the logistics of an executive calendar across 3 time zones turned out to be the same job in different clothing. The difference was the building. He had never worked inside a house where the silence had weight. He learned to move quietly through it. On a Friday afternoon, near the end of that second week, he carried a fresh cup of coffee into the office and stopped a half step inside the door. Victoria was on a call. The speakerphone was on. The voice coming through it belonged to a man in his 60s, the kind of voice that had been trained in rooms with mahogany and money and had never been asked to lower itself for anyone. Gerald Hayworth, board member, original investor, Victoria. Hayworth was saying, "You can't have someone with that background sitting that close to sensitive files. I'm not making it about anything else. The optics alone, you understand the optics. Our institutional clients see who's in the room, they notice. And right now they're noticing." There was a silence. 8 full seconds. Ethan counted them without meaning to. Victoria did not agree. She also did not disagree. She just let the silence sit there, neither defending him nor selling him out, which was somehow worse than either, because it meant she was thinking about it. Ethan stepped back into the hallway before she saw him. He set the coffee down on the small table by the door, waited 30 seconds, and walked back in like nothing had happened. He placed the coffee on her desk. She did not look up. He went to his desk. He opened the Walsh litigation file. The plaintiff's firm had filed 3 motions in 6 weeks that Victoria's outside counsel had treated as separate. Ethan had been seeing the pattern for 2 days. He spent 90 minutes building a 2-page brief. The motions were the same argument in 3 different costumes, and if Victoria's team kept treating them separately, the plaintiff would win on attrition. He printed the brief. He walked it to her desk. He set it down without a word. He did not say, "I am still here. I am good at this." The 2 pages said it for him. She read the first page while he was walking back to his chair. He could see her read it because her shoulders did the small thing they did when she was reading something she had not expected. She did not thank him. He had not expected her to. That night, at 8:40, Sophie called. Ethan picked up on the first ring. "Daddy, the caterpillar isn't moving today." He kept his voice steady. "That's okay, sweetheart. The book said they go still right before the chrysalis. That means it's working. It's getting ready." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He listened to her, described the caterpillar's exact position for 4 minutes. He listened to her, describe what color she thought the wings would be. He told her he loved her, and that he would be home by 9:30. And after he hung up, he sat in his truck in the driveway of a house that was not his, and looked at his hands for a moment. The steadiness in his voice was a skill. He had been practicing it for 3 years, since the night he had come home from the hospital and found his 4-year-old asleep on the couch with the television on. He kept practicing it now, because no 8-second silence on a speakerphone was going to teach his daughter that her father could be moved. The 3rd week, the lunch plates arrived. There were 2 of them. Mrs. Polson set one on Ethan's desk and carried the other into Victoria's office, and neither woman said a word about it. And Ethan, who had learned the geometry of this house quickly, said nothing about it either. He ate at his desk. Victoria ate at hers. The hallway between them stayed quiet, but the quiet had a different texture now, less like absence, and more like an arrangement nobody had wanted to name. On Wednesday of that week, Victoria looked up from her screen at 4 in the afternoon and said, almost casually, "Your daughter. What's her name?" Ethan turned in his chair. It was the first personal question she had asked him in 18 days. "Sophie," he said. "How old?" 7. Victoria nodded, the kind of nod that ended a topic. Then she didn't end it. "She's the reason you're still here. She's one of them." Something flickered across her face. She filed it away. He pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward her. A photograph of Sophie, crouched in the backyard, with her face 3 inches from a small plastic terrarium, a jar in her hand, the morning sun catching the side of her head. Victoria looked at the photo for longer than she needed to. 2.5 seconds. 3, 4. "She's beautiful," Victoria said, and it came out quieter than her usual voice. "She's 7, Ethan said. "She doesn't know that yet. I'd like to keep it that way for a while." Victoria almost smiled. The corner of her mouth moved a fraction. She caught it before it became anything and turned back to her screen. Ethan put his phone away. He noticed his own hand was steadier than it had been at the start of the week. That evening, when Victoria's last call ended at 6:40, and she had wheeled to the small off. Genbin found Ethan in the kitchen. She poured herself a coffee and stood at the counter for a moment, weighing something. Then she set the cup down. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I'm only telling you because I think you'll handle it the right way." Ethan waited. "In 10 months, 11 people sat in your chair. 3 of them were black. 2 were Asian. The longest any of them lasted was 8 days. She watched him to see if he flinched. He didn't. They did not quit because of her. Most of them. Anyway, they quit because Mr. Hayworth made it impossible for them to stay." Comments at the door. A word to the agency afterward. He made sure their references didn't help them find the next position. 2 of them never worked in this kind of role again. She lifted the coffee, took a slow sip, set it back down. "She doesn't know," Mrs. Polson said. "Or she doesn't want to know. There's a difference, but from where you and I are standing, it's not much of one." Ethan thought about the 8-second silence on the speakerphone. He thought about the day Victoria had taken the Hartman test from him and watched him refuse to fail it. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "I told you because I want you to stay," Mrs. Polson said. "And I want her to learn the difference between not knowing and not wanting to know. I think you can teach her that. The others were good people. None of them are going to teach her that." She picked up the coffee and left the kitchen. Ethan stood at the counter for a long time after she was gone. He thought about Sophie, asleep at his mother's house, who did not yet know how many rooms in this country were arranged around making sure her father did not stay in them. Both things could be true at once. By the 5th week, the rhythm in the building had shifted. Victoria still corrected him daily, still found the small flaws that lived in any 40-hour week. But the corrections had changed shape. They were no longer designed to drive him out. They had started to look like the way she corrected her own work, precise, impersonal, more about the work than the person doing it. Ethan noticed without naming it. Naming it would have made it fragile. On a Tuesday morning, an email landed in Victoria's inbox from Gerald Hayworth. The subject line read, "Proposed governance adjustments for board review." Ethan flagged it as urgent and walked it to her desk, watching her face as she read. The first attachment was a proposal for a leadership restructuring committee, a committee that, if ratified, would put a ceiling above her on any decision over a certain threshold. The second attachment was a draft policy, executive assistant background screening protocol. Hayworth had underlined the phrase twice. The protocol added 3 new credentialing requirements, all of which conveniently excluded anyone whose career had been built outside the kind of pipelines that had never been particularly open to people who looked like Ethan Brooks. She read it twice. Then she set the printout down. "He's not even hiding it," she said. "No," Ethan said. "He's not." She started to say something else, but the intercom buzzed. Mrs. Polson's voice came through, tight. "Miss Sterling, Mr. Hayworth is here. He says he was in the neighborhood." Hayworth was in the foyer when Ethan stepped out of the office. Tall, gray hair, perfectly trimmed. The kind of camel coat that announced an income bracket without having to speak. He looked at Ethan the way a man looks at furniture he is considering rearranging. "You must be the new one," Hayworth said. He extended a hand. Ethan shook it once, firmly, and let go first. "Listen, I'm sure you understand how things work here, son. This is a particular environment. There's a culture to it, the clients we serve, the boards we sit on. I'm just saying, for your own sake, it pays to know which rooms you fit in and which rooms you don't." Ethan's voice came out flat and even. "It's Mr. Brooks, sir, and I fit in the room I'm working in." Mrs. Polson, at the end of the hallway with a tray of water, gripped the tray hard enough to whiten her knuckles. The intercom on Ethan's desk had been left on. Victoria heard everything. She wheeled to the office door. "Gerald," she said, and her voice was the voice she used on conference calls with people who had badly miscalculated. "Come in. Now." She closed the door behind him. 7 minutes. Ethan worked at his desk. He did not try to listen. He could not have heard the words, even if he had tried Victoria's voice. When she was angry, was low and controlled. The kind of low that did not carry through walls, but did the damage anyway. The door opened. Hayworth came out with his face the color of a man who had not been spoken to that way in a very long time. He did not look at Ethan. He did not look at Mrs. Polson. He pulled on his coat and walked to the front door and let himself out. Victoria wheeled back to her desk. She did not explain. She looked at the screen, then at the legal brief Ethan had left on the corner of her desk 40 minutes earlier, the one mapping the Walsh motions onto a single strategy. "We have work to do," she said. It was the first time she had stood beside him, even though she had said nothing of the kind out loud. Mrs. Polson walked back to the kitchen with the gait of a woman who had been holding the breath she had not realized she was holding for 9 years. The email came in on a Thursday morning at 6:42. Ethan saw it first, the way he saw everything first. A social forward from a mutual acquaintance, the kind of forward people sent through professional channels when they didn't have a personal address. The subject line read, "Congratulations to Daniel and Simone engaged." He did not know who Daniel was. He filed the email in the standard social correspondence folder and moved on. He learned who Daniel was at 9:15. Victoria opened her inbox at her desk, read 3 emails, opened the 4th, and went completely still. The kind of still that was the opposite of calm. She read it again. She closed the message. She opened it. She closed it. "Continue," she said. When she realized Ethan had stopped speaking mid-briefing, he continued. He pretended he had not seen her face. They got through the morning the way 2 professionals got through a building on fire, by agreeing without speaking that the fire was not in the room. That night, the heating system failed. Ethan noticed at 9:50 when the temperature dropped 4 degrees in 17 minutes. He called the building maintenance company. They told him 3 hours. He pushed. They gave him 2. He told Victoria the situation, told her he was going to source portable heaters from the hardware store 6 blocks east before it closed at 11. And was out the door before she could disagree. He came back in 18 minutes with 2 space heaters. He set one in her office, one in the hallway. The room stopped getting colder. It was 10:20 by then. Both of them had been there since 7. Neither of them had eaten dinner. Victoria looked at the heater on the floor, and then at him, and something in the architecture of her face had loosened. "Daniel was my fiancé before the accident," she said, without preamble. "We were engaged for 8 months. The accident happened in March. He ended the engagement in July." Ethan did not say anything. He sat at the edge of the desk, in the chair he had pulled over earlier. "I told everyone he left because he couldn't handle it. That's the version I let people believe, because it's the version that doesn't require anyone to know more." She looked at the window. "He didn't leave because of the chair. He left because his parents stopped seeing me the same way. His mother told him I would be a burden. His father said the family name had a reputation to consider. Daniel listened to them. He was always going to listen to them." She said it without crying. She said it the way someone reads a fact off a page they have read too many times. "Some people only love the easy part," Ethan said. "You don't owe an apology for the hard part." She looked at him. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said. "Maya. Heart condition we didn't know about. She went to bed feeling tired and didn't wake up. Sophie was 4. I went back to work on day 8 because we didn't have enough in savings to cover the rent." Victoria's hands were very still in her lap. "Some days the only thing I have to give Sophie is the version of me that's pretending to be fine," he said. "Some days that's enough. Most days I don't know." The photograph on the windowsill caught the light at an angle. It had been there as long as Ethan had been working in the room. Daniel was in it, half turned, an arm around a younger version of Victoria, who was laughing. She wheeled to the window. She turned the frame to face the wall. In the morning, when Ethan arrived at 7:15, the frame was still facing the wall. Mrs. Polson had not touched it. She had learned a long time ago what to leave where Victoria put it. 2 weeks after the heater night, on a gray Tuesday in February, Sophie's elementary school called Ethan at 8:40 to inform him that the furnace had failed overnight and students were being sent home. His mother was at a doctor's appointment 2 towns away. His backup arrangements had been built for sick days and snow days, not mid-morning closures with no warning. He thought it through in 4 minutes while updating Victoria's morning calendar. Then he knocked on her office door. "My daughter's school just closed for the day," he said. "I have 2 options. I can leave for 2 hours to arrange coverage, or I can bring her here. Neither is ideal. I'm telling you so you can pick the one that's least disruptive. Victoria looked up. Something in her face shifted, not surprise exactly, but the specific stillness that came before a decision. Bring her, she said. He brought her. The drive from the school to Greenwich took 31 minutes. Sophie sat in the back seat in her purple jacket, her library book open in her lap. As they pulled onto Victoria's street, she went quiet. She looked out at the houses, the manicured lawns, the woman jogging on the sidewalk who had stopped and was watching their truck pass with an expression that was not friendly. "Daddy," Sophie said, "why is that lady looking at us funny?" Ethan kept his hands at 10 and 2. "Some people aren't used to seeing our family in this neighborhood, sweetheart. That's their thing to figure out, not ours. We just keep being us." "Okay," Sophie said, and went back to her book. Inside the house, Mrs. Polson knelt to Sophie's height and offered her grilled cheese and tomato soup for lunch. Sophie, who had inherited her father's habit of treating adults like equals, told her the soup sounded perfect. Ethan settled her in the small sitting room with her colored pencils. She agreed, with the careful seriousness of a child accepting terms. She stayed for 38 minutes. Then, she appeared in the doorway of the office with a drawing in her hand and walked, without hesitation, up to Victoria's desk. Victoria looked at her. Ethan was already half out of his chair. "Why are you in a wheelchair?" Sophie asked. "Sophie, it's all right," Victoria said. She set down her pen. She looked at the 7-year-old in front of her the way she looked at problems that required honest answers. "I was in a car accident. My legs don't move the way they used to." Sophie processed this with a child's unembarrassed seriousness. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes. When I'm working on getting better." "Oh." Sophie thought about this. Then she set her drawing on the corner of Victoria's desk. "I drew the staircase. The colors aren't right. I only have regular colors, but I think it's okay." Victoria looked at the drawing for a long moment. It was a child's drawing, proportions slightly off, the floor pattern simplified, but the light in the hallway window had been observed and rendered with a care that had nothing to do with skill. "It's good," Victoria said. "Sign it." "Sign it?" "In the corner. Artists sign their work." Sophie signed it. At lunch, Mrs. Polson brought 3 plates. Sophie sat in the chair beside Victoria's desk and described the entire life cycle of a monarch butterfly between bites of grilled cheese. At 3 o'clock, she fell asleep in the reading chair near the window, her hand still curled around a colored pencil. Ethan crossed the room and laid his jacket over her shoulders. Victoria watched him do it. "She trusts you specifically," Victoria said, quietly enough not to wake her. Ethan looked at his daughter asleep, in a room he had been afraid to bring her into. He could not answer Victoria. Answering would have required him to say out loud the thing he was not yet ready to say. By the 11th week, the physical therapy sessions had intensified. Marcus, Victoria's physical therapist, came 3 times a week, now, instead of 2. He was 45, black, 6'2", with the unhurried manner of a man who had stopped letting his patients' moods determine his own a long time ago. Ethan had crossed paths with him a dozen times in the hallway. They had nodded at each other, the way men in adjacent professions nodded recognition without conversation. On a Thursday in early March, Marcus caught him by the kitchen door. "You got a minute?" Marcus said. "I got one." Marcus leaned against the frame. "She told me something last week. She said somebody told her the wall she built was the real problem, not the chair. She said she'd been arguing with that sentence in her head for a month before she finally let it land." He looked at Ethan. "I don't know who said it to her. She didn't tell me. But whoever it was, they got something right. She's working harder than I've seen her work in 18 months. Whatever you said, it was the right thing at the right time." "I didn't. I know you didn't say it for me to know about." Marcus pushed off the frame. "I just wanted you to hear it from somebody who's been watching this from the inside. That's all." He walked back to the therapy room. Ethan stood in the kitchen for a moment with his hand on the counter. Then he went back to his desk and did not let it show on his face for the rest of the day. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning at 10:51, the door of the therapy room opened. Ethan was at his desk. He heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the chair. Footsteps. The slow, careful kind of someone doing something that was costing them everything they had. Victoria appeared in the doorway of the office. She was standing, one hand on the doorframe, her shoulders rigid with effort. Marcus a half step behind her, hands ready but not touching. She was breathing the way people breathed, at the top of a flight of stairs they had not been sure they could climb. Ethan stood up. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her eye to eye, the same height for the first time in 5 months, and he did not move toward her further. He did not embrace her. He put one hand on her forearm, steady, just enough contact to be a point of reference if her balance wavered. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. 31 seconds, Marcus said quietly, from behind her. "Don't count out loud," Victoria said, without looking away from Ethan. "I'm doing my job. Do it quieter." Ethan almost smiled. She held it for 31 seconds. Then her right knee gave the smallest tremor and Marcus moved in, smooth and fast, and lowered her back into the chair. She did not apologize for the chair. She did not flinch as she landed. She looked up at Ethan, and her eyes were bright. In a way, she did not let her eyes be bright in front of most people. He held the look. She held it back for the first time in 5 months. She was not the one in the room with the most armor on. At 1 o'clock, Hayworth called. Mrs. Polson said in a careful voice that Mr. Hayworth was on the line, that he wanted to schedule an emergency board session regarding what he was calling ongoing operational concerns. Victoria looked at Ethan. She smiled. It was a smile he had never seen her use before. Small and a little dangerous, and entirely her own. "Tell him I'll be standing for the next vote," she said. The board meeting was scheduled for April 17th at 10 in the morning. Victoria spent 2 weeks preparing for it. Ethan spent 2 weeks preparing with her. They built the Q4 performance package, the way they had built the previous one. Only this time the documents had his hand in them, visibly his analysis, his framing, his 3-page memorandum on the Walsh resolution that had saved the company $800,000 in legal exposure. The morning of the meeting, Victoria looked at him over the top of her laptop. "I want you in the room," she said. "Not in the hallway, in the room. As Executive Operations Advisor. That's not a title I have. It is now." He went into the room with her. The board members took their seats. Marcus Chen, the Chief Operating Officer, on Victoria's right. Diane Park, Board Director and Korean American Venture Partner, 2 seats down. Warren, Simmons, Ewan, and Hayworth at the far end, in the chair he had occupied for 9 years. Hayworth saw Ethan and did not bother to hide his reaction. "Before we begin," he said, "I'd like to formally object to the inclusion of Mr. Brooks. He doesn't have the pedigree for a meeting of this gravity. Frankly, his profile doesn't fit the room. I'm not making this personal. I'm speaking to optics. Our clients see who sits at this table." The room was silent for a count of 3. Diane Park set down her pen. She was a small woman, 54, with a voice that did not need to be raised to be heard. "Gerald," she said, "I want to ask you something directly, and I'd like a direct answer. If the only reason Mr. Brooks isn't being credited with the Q4 turnaround in your remarks, the turnaround that the data in front of us makes very clear he contributed materially to, is his background, then the problem in this room isn't with him. It's with us, and it's particularly with you." Hayworth opened his mouth, closed it. Across the table, Marcus Chen made a small mark beside item 3 with the kind of deliberation that read, "On closer inspection," as a vote. Victoria did not raise her voice. She did not lean forward. She spoke the way she spoke when she was past anger and into something colder. "He has results," she said, "which is what this room is supposed to value." The restructuring proposal went to a vote at 11:40. 4-2 against. Warren abstained. Hayworth and Simmons voted in favor. Everyone else voted with Victoria. The meeting adjourned at 12:06. Ethan and Victoria walked out together, she in her chair, him at her left shoulder, and at the end of the corridor where the elevator stopped. She said, without looking up at him, "I've been thinking about something for 6 months. I want to build a company, not inside this one. Beside it, accessibility technology. The real kind. The kind that actually solves the problem instead of checking the compliance box. She finally looked at him. "I don't want a chief of staff. I want a co-founder. I want to build it with you." He looked at her for a long time. "With me," he said. "With you?" He nodded once. That was all he needed to say in the hallway. They rode the elevator down in silence. In the brushed steel reflection of the closed doors, a black man in a charcoal suit, a white woman in a chair was the kind of image her board had spent years arranging never to be the first one anyone saw. Neither of them looked away. The launch event for Meridian Access took place on the second Tuesday of May in the ballroom of a hotel 3 blocks from Bryant Park in Manhattan. 240 people, press, investors, accessibility advocates, 3 of Victoria's largest existing clients, 2 state legislators who had been quietly briefed in advance. Ethan had managed the logistics for 6 weeks. Victoria had handled the message. She walked to the podium with a single cane in her right hand, not the chair. The room saw it and did not know what to do with what it was seeing. The room had not been told. Half of the audience had known her for years. She spoke for 19 minutes. She spoke about the gap between what compliance required and what people actually needed. She spoke about the specific failures she had cataloged across 2 industries. She spoke about the tools Meridian Access had built and the clients who had already signed on to test them. And then, near the end, she said, "There is a man in this room who refused to leave when staying was harder than leaving. He showed up every morning when he had every reason not to. He told me the wall I had built was the real problem, and he stood on the other side of it long enough for me to remember how to take it down. He isn't here as a symbol. He's here because nothing you are about to see would exist without him." She did not say his name. She did not have to. The applause lasted longer than it usually did at events like this. In the question portion afterward, a reporter from a business weakly raised a hand. He was in his 50s, white, expensive shoes. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "what specific qualifications brought you into the co-founding role?" Ethan stepped to the microphone. He did not look at Victoria. He did not need to. "The Walsh litigation resolution that saved the company. $800,000 in exposure. The Q4 supplier renegotiation that delivered 11% margin recovery, 2 enterprise contracts already signed for Meridian Access in pre-launch, and the operational structure of the company you're sitting in. I have the documentation. I'd be happy to walk you through it after the panel." The reporter wrote something down. He did not ask a follow-up. A second journalist, younger, in a green jacket, leaned forward as if to follow up, then thought better of it and lowered her hand. The moderator called on someone else. In the second row, Sophie sat between her grandmother and an empty seat in a navy blue dress with white trim. She held up a stick-figure drawing she had been working on for the last 20 minutes. 2 adults, 1 child, 1 wheelchair, and a butterfly above all of their heads. She signed it in the lower right corner the way she had been taught. Mrs. Polson stood backstage with her hands folded in front of her, watching the way a person watches a moment they have been waiting a very long time to see. Halfway through the room, she caught Ethan's eye and gave him a single nod, small, deliberate, the kind of nod that contained everything she had once said in a kitchen on a Wednesday night. He returned it. December came in cold. The way December always came in cold, along the Connecticut shoreline. Snow had fallen on the first weekend of the month and stayed in the corners of things, in the angles of the house, on the railings of the staircase Sophie had drawn nearly a year earlier. On a Thursday afternoon, the 3 of them were in Victoria's office. Ethan and Victoria worked through the next board deck for Meridian Access at the long table they had pulled in 2 months earlier. Sophie sat by the window in the reading chair, a fresh set of colored pencils on a small folding tray, drawing the snow on the back garden the way she now drew everything with patience, and a signature in the corner when she was done. The room was quiet for a long stretch. Then Sophie looked up. "Daddy," she said, "are we a family now?" Ethan set his pen down. "What made you ask, sweetheart?" She shrugged the small shrug she made when she had been thinking about something for a while before she said it. "My book said, monarch butterflies always go back to the same place, even if they've never been there before. They just know where home is." She looked at the window, at Victoria, at her father. "We keep ending up in the same place. So I was wondering. Ethan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at the windowsill. The butterfly drawing and the staircase drawing sat there, side by side, where the photograph of Daniel had once faced outward. They had been there for almost a year now. Sophie had added a third drawing in October, the three of them in the office. Stick figures. All three signed. Victoria reached across the table and put her hand over Ethan's. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Sophie nodded the way a child nods when an answer has been confirmed and went back to her drawing. Outside the window, the snow kept falling on the garden where, in the spring, a 7-year-old had once watched a chrysalis open without watching it and accepted that some things happened whether you were looking or not. There is a version of this story that gets told as a rescue narrative. The man who saved the broken woman. The woman who gave the struggling man a future. That version is cleaner, but that is not what happened. What happened was two adults who had spent years inside stories about who they were after loss. One had decided her chair was the reason she was alone. The other had decided his only job left was to hold things together for his daughter and not be moved. They were both wrong. In the specific, understandable way people are wrong when they are doing the best they can with what the worst days have left them. The wall you build to keep loss out is the same wall that keeps everything worth having out. And the only way through it is to let one person stay long enough to remind you who you were before you forgot. That person, if you are paying attention, is usually already in the